Our sweet daughter Clara is turning 30, which we can't believe. She's been a lifelong lover of literature, and one of the versions of Little Women that we have loved her whole life really is this 1990s Winona Ryder version of Little Women, which features this beautiful little birdhouse that the women in Orchard House use to exchange notes and little gifts with Lori, who lives next door. So as part of her extravaganza 30th birthday celebration, I'm building this replica, which I started with just half-inch scraps of plywood, and then it needed corner boards, and then of course it needed siding, and so I cut a whole bunch of clapboards on the table saw and installed them with the stapler there, as you might if you were doing it on a bigger house. It was the same kind of process, just working the way up from the bottom. And then here, I've decided that what the roof needs is some cedar shakes or cedar shake lookalikes. So I made that little jig there that is cutting little wedges that will end up looking like cedar shakes. And again, this is all scrap, so I'm using the ends of 2x4s that haven't been used, and then the little jig cuts a wedge off on each pass. And then as the block gets too small to use safely, then I just switch it out for another block and keep cutting more shakes, because it's going to take a lot of shakes. And then I wanted them to look aged, so there's the vacuum set up and an old drill with a wire brush in it. And the drill is being held on in reverse by a hand clamp so that it'll just continuously run and will spin downward and away from me so that the dust actually shoots right out into that janky dust collector I set up there. But it gives it a little texture, making it look like an aged cedar shake. And there were a bunch of these to do, so I love to just kind of settle into these repetitive processes and think about the person that this is being built for. This is our sweet, beloved firstborn who is actually turning 30 that we can't believe. And so I'm thinking about her as I'm putting texture on each individual little imitation cedar shake. And then because the roof material is pretty thin, it's 1/8-inch plywood, because I didn't want the roof to be heavy, I'm not going to staple these on because the staples would stick through, and I feel like that would just be tacky on the inside, pretty literally. So I'm using a combination of regular wood glue on the bottom there, and then a dot of CA glue. It's the 2-part super glue made for woodworking that with that spray catalyst just hardens really quickly, and then it holds the piece in place as the wood glue dries, and then you can move on to the next row of shakes. And then when I got to the top, it was easy to just staple them in because the staples are not poking through there at that point in the ridge of the roof. So it's just regular wood glue and a couple of staples, and it was pretty satisfying because it moved pretty quickly. And looked pretty cool, if I do say so myself. I love the texture on those shingles. And then I'm going to use my Japanese-style pole saw to trim the excess off the roof there. And then I'm going to need a ridge pole, which I didn't film, a ridge cap, but it made it out of 2 pieces that were glued together at the right angle, so it'd sit right over the top of the roof. And then it's time for assembly. So in order to locate the roof properly, the roof portion on the house portion, I decided to install the hinges on the top of the house wall first, because that was the obvious place where they needed to go. And then use those to line up and mark where the hinges actually needed to attach on that soffit if you will, portion of the roof. And so I took the hinges off and then installed them on the roof. And then I'm going to go back and fit the roof portion to the house and use the holes that initially were in the top of the wall to put the screws back in, and then that way we're joining the 2 pieces here. I'm going to try it first with 2 screws and see if it closes properly and sits in the right place. And it looks good. So I'm going to put the other 2 screws in. And that should hold it together quite well. For finish, I decided on a spray-on stain because it's just a small project and it was an inexpensive purchase to get the stain enough to do the house. And I wanted it to look aged, so I'm going to spray it on each side and leave it for a few minutes, and then I'm going to wipe off the excess, which gives it a little bit of a distressed kind of aged look if you see it up close, which I felt came out kind of cool. I really liked. And I also wanted to do the inside because over the course of the birthday celebration extravaganza, Clara is going to find clues inside this little house that will describe what is going to happen next in the birthday party. So there's a whole thing that's all set up that the house figures highly in. And there's what the outside looks like. But one of the things we're going to need is a little shelf inside, because some of the things that Clara will find in the house are going to be things like cards and paper, and at one point a little pear. And so we wanted those things to sit higher in the house. So I cut that center hole and I'm chamfering it on the router table, and I'm going to give it a little sanding and then install a cleat on either side to hold the shelf up. And here's what it looks like when it goes in. Pretty cool. Here's the original, and here's the copy.
And here comes the big reveal. It's out in front of the house, and here's Clara.